The prince insulted the maid in Arabic and froze when she answered in fluent Arabic. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Granada stirred before dawn, its courtyards humming with the nervous rhythm of servants preparing for the arrival of foreign nobility. Zahira moved among them with quiet speed, her steps light, her focus sharp. She had carried trays, folded linens, and polished copper bowls since sunrise, slipping through the palace like a shadow. No one looked twice at her. That was how she preferred it. But the morning shifted the instant the North African delegation entered the gates. A ripple of whispers spread through the servants' hall as word traveled. The prince had arrived. Prince Omar ibn Rashid, known for his temper, his education, and his ability to silence entire rooms with a single look. Zahira felt none of the excitement the others shared. She only prayed she would not cross his path. The palace was large, the staff countless. She could work behind the scenes, unseen. Yet fate had a habit of stepping directly in her way. She had just reached the main courtyard with a tall clay jar balanced in her arms when the delegation approached from the opposite side. Advisors in embroidered robes trailed behind the prince. Soldiers in ceremonial garments walked in perfect formation, and in the middle, tall and composed, moved Omar himself. Zahira froze for a heartbeat. She lowered her gaze at once, planning to pass quickly, silently, invisibly. But a girl near her stumbled, bumping Zahira's shoulder. The jar wobbled. Zahira tried to catch it, but her fingers slipped on the curve of the clay. The jar crashed to the stones at the prince's feet, shattering in a loud, hollow burst. The courtyard fell silent. Zahira's breath vanished. She dropped to her knees at once, gathering the fragments with trembling hands. A few servants gasped softly. A supervisor hissed her name under his breath, already bracing for consequences. Omar stopped walking. His advisors paused as well, creating a half-circle of expectation. The prince's jaw tightened. He looked down at Zahira, who knelt before him like a figure carved from fear. He spoke sharply. The words came fast, edged with impatience, every sound formed in crisp, impeccable Arabic. It was a reprimand spoken with the confidence of a man certain no one around him understood a single syllable. "Have you no eyes in your head?" he demanded. "Or do you simply enjoy causing trouble wherever you step?" Gasps fluttered among the servants, even if they understood nothing. Tone alone carried enough weight to sting. Zahira's shoulders tightened. She kept her gaze on the broken pieces, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She was used to harsh words, but something in the prince's tone struck a place inside her she had locked away years before. The supervisor whispered urgently, "Stand, girl, stand!" But Zahira did not rise. She drew one slow breath, steadying her hands. She lifted her head only halfway, enough to meet the prince's shadow without challenging him. Then she answered. Fluent, clear, precise Arabic flowed from her lips. "My eyes see well enough, Your Highness," she said quietly. "It is the weight I misjudged, not my senses. And for that mistake I already kneel before you." The courtyard went still. Omar's expression froze. His eyes widened just a fraction, but the change was unmistakable. His advisors exchanged startled looks. One servant dropped the cloth he was holding. Someone whispered a prayer. The prince opened his mouth, but failed to produce a sound. His mind struggled to reorder itself. He replayed the moment in his head. Her accent, her tone, her vocabulary. No untrained servant spoke that way. No uneducated girl carried that level of mastery. Her Arabic belonged to halls of study, not to dusty laundry rooms. Zahira held his gaze for a moment longer, though her own pulse raced beneath the calm she forced into her voice. She bowed her head again, resuming her work of gathering the shards. Omar finally found his voice. "Where did you learn?" But she rose swiftly, dipping her head in a respectful bow before he could finish. She backed away, careful, silent, fading from the center of attention with practiced ease. She did not run. She simply slipped through a side passage, disappearing before anyone could call her name. Omar watched the space she had vacated, confusion settling heavily on his face. He turned to his advisor. "Who is she?" "A maid, Your Highness," the man replied uncertainly. "That is all." "That," Omar murmured, "is clearly not all." He looked again at the broken shards on the ground, as though they held the answer to the riddle standing in front of him. But the courtyard was already returning to its tasks, though whispers followed every step he took. He resumed walking, yet his pace was slower now, his thoughts tangled. A single question clung to him with stubborn force. How had a maid, just a maid, spoken Arabic, as though raised among scholars? Zahira hurried through the servants' wing, her breath still unsteady. She locked herself briefly inside the laundry room, leaning against the wall. Her hands shook. She pressed her palms together, trying to quiet the memories rushing to the surface. She had not meant to reveal herself. She had promised she would stay silent, stay small, stay invisible. But old wounds had sharp edges, and the prince's insult had touched them without mercy. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the past, gentle and steady. Knowledge is a lantern. Hide it too long, and its flame grows restless. A soft knock came at the door. Zahira straightened at once. "Zahira?" a young maid called. "The supervisor wants you. They say the prince asked about you." Zahira's heart thudded painfully. "I'll come in a moment," she answered, steadying her tone. The footsteps faded. She breathed deeply, pressing a hand to her chest. Her world had shifted in a single moment. Someone had finally noticed the part of herself she had buried. Omar, meanwhile, spent the morning distracted. During the welcoming ceremony, he kept glancing toward the servants' wing. He listened half-heartedly to political introductions, his thoughts drifting to a pair of steady eyes and a voice too refined for the role assigned to her. He asked 2 more servants if they knew the girl's family. Neither could answer. One shrugged helplessly. The other whispered, "She arrived after the winter storms. No one knows much." Those words unsettled him even more. Late in the day, while his advisers reviewed documents in the council chamber, Omar stepped into the corridor alone. He knew he should not wander without escort, yet the question gnawed at him with growing irritation. He found a group of maids arranging table linens. "Where is the girl from this morning?" he asked in Spanish, touched by a foreign accent. They exchanged anxious glances. "Which girl, Your Highness?" one asked. "The one who dropped the jar." Still no answer. "The one who speaks Arabic," he added. All 3 maids went silent. We do not speak of her languages," one whispered. "It causes trouble." Omar frowned. "Why trouble?" But they only lowered their heads. He stepped back, frustration rising. The palace seemed full of secrets tied to a servant who should have had none. As evening neared, Zahira tried to keep her distance from the busier corridors, but every direction she turned, she sensed eyes following her. Soft whispers, quick glances, questions she could not afford to answer. She carried a basket of linens through a long hallway, intending to deliver them quickly, and return to the quieter corners of the palace. But her steps faltered when she heard a male voice around the corner, not loud, not angry, simply searching. "Have you seen her?" Omar asked someone. Zahira's spine stiffened. She moved silently, slipping behind a tapestry before he could turn. Her breath barely stirred the air. Omar stepped into the hallway moments later, his gaze scanning the length of it. He looked more puzzled than stern, as though he could feel her presence without seeing her. He took a slow breath, speaking to no one in particular. "I will speak to her again," he murmured. "She cannot hide forever." Zahira closed her eyes. The words were soft, but they carried the certainty of a man who always found what he sought. He turned to leave, unaware that Zahira stood only a few feet away, separated from him by a single woven curtain. She waited until his footsteps faded entirely, but even as she stepped back into the hallway, she knew something with chilling clarity. The prince was not a man who forgot an unanswered question, and now she had become one. She had barely taken 3 steps when she heard his voice return, closer this time, sharper. "Someone here knows where she is." Zahira froze. The palace settled into a restless rhythm the next morning, as though yesterday's shock lingered in its walls. Zahira kept her head low while carrying folded sheets across the courtyard, hoping the busy movement of servants would hide her. But whispers followed her like a quiet trail. They did not mention Arabic aloud, yet she caught fragments of cautious tones. "Did you hear—" No, don't speak of it." The prince looked for her again. She walked faster, but her pulse refused to calm. Inside the guest corridor, attendants hurried to prepare rooms for the evening's meetings. Zahira laid the linens on a table and began smoothing each one carefully, her hands working faster than her thoughts. She had lived years without drawing notice. One mistake had changed everything. A maid approached her with wide eyes. "Zahira, the prince asked for you again." Zahira tried to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps he only wishes to ensure the jar was replaced." "That is not what it looked like," the girl whispered. "He asked your name twice. He had that look nobles get when they intend to find someone." Zahira stiffened. She folded the final sheet with short, precise motions and placed it onto the stack. "Did you tell him anything?" she asked. "Nothing," the maid replied quickly. "I said I had no idea where you worked today." Zahira exhaled a small breath of relief. "Thank you," the girl shook her head. "I am not protecting you out of kindness. I only fear the trouble this will bring if he keeps asking." Zahira nodded slowly, "Then keep saying you do not know." Before the girl could answer, the sound of footsteps approached, firm, steady, unmatched by any servant. Zahira stepped behind the table, but the maid whispered urgently, "He's coming this way." Zahira lifted the stack of linens as though preparing to deliver them elsewhere and slipped out through a side passage, the familiar maze of corridors giving her cover. She moved quickly, turning corners before voices could catch her. Meanwhile, Omar walked with clear purpose. He spoke to 2 attendants, but they offered nothing useful. He tried again with a guard who shrugged apologetically. Omar's frustration grew. He was not used to running in circles. He stopped near a pillar and looked around with narrowed eyes. "One girl cannot simply vanish inside a palace," he muttered. But Zahira had become an expert in moving unseen long before stepping foot in this place. She reached the laundry wing and set down the linens, steadying her breath. A supervisor noticed her and frowned. "You seem nervous this morning." "I am only tired," Zahira replied. "That is not what I heard," the woman said with a pointed look. "Did something happen with the prince yesterday?" Zahira hesitated. "The jar fell. Nothing more." The supervisor's eyebrows lifted. "Nothing more?" "Elvira was nearly trembling with excitement last night. She asked 3 servants about you. That alone is enough to worry me." Zahira swallowed. "Did she say why?" "She asked questions that did not sound like harmless curiosity," the supervisor said softly. "And you know how she enjoys stirring trouble." Zahira felt the warning settle heavy in her chest. She bowed her head. "I will be careful." "You must be," the supervisor insisted. "If she senses something unusual in you, she will not let it rest." Zahira returned to her tasks, folding the freshly washed garments with quick, neat motions. But Elvira's name echoed in her thoughts, mingling with the prince's unrelenting curiosity. She had lived a long time in silence, and silence had kept her safe. Yet now 2 powerful people had noticed her in the same day. It was dangerous. In another part of the palace, Omar discussed the upcoming diplomatic ceremony with his advisor. But midway through the briefing, he asked abruptly, "Have you learned anything about the servant girl?" The advisor blinked. "Your Highness, this is hardly—" "I asked a simple question," Omar cut in. The advisor cleared his throat. "Only that she keeps to herself. She has performed her duties with no issues." "Her accent was not that of a common household," Omar insisted. "It was refined, precise." The advisor hesitated. "Perhaps she mimicked it." "No," Omar said firmly. "You do not mimic classical Arabic without years of study." He stood abruptly. "I will find her myself." The advisor opened his mouth to protest, but Omar was already leaving the chamber. Zahira spent the next hour in the scullery, helping wash spills from table runners. Steam filled the room, and she welcomed the temporary concealment. But each time the door opened, her shoulders tensed. A maid rushed in, breathless. "Zahira!" he asked again. Zahira's hands stilled. "Where?" "Near the inner courtyard. He asked 2 footmen if they had seen you today." Zahira wiped her hands, her voice low. "And did they?" "No. They only pointed in random directions. They were too frightened to admit anything." Zahira's heart tightened. "He cannot keep searching for a servant. He has duties." The maid gave her a sympathetic glance. "A prince can do as he wishes." Left alone again, Zahira leaned against the wash basin, her thoughts racing. She needed to stay unseen at least until the prince's curiosity faded. She could not afford whatever questions he intended to ask. But she also knew curiosity rarely faded when ignored. By midday, the palace hummed with preparations for the evening's dinner. Servants rushed with trays and instructions. Zahira tried to blend into the pace of the others, but she caught the shift of glances whenever she entered a room. She felt watched from all sides. While collecting napkins from the sewing room, she heard the sharp, familiar voice of Doña Elvira drifting through the hallway. "I saw her this morning," Elvira said lightly. "She pretended not to notice me." "How interesting," another woman replied nervously. "Perhaps she was busy." "No," Elvira said. "She avoided me. I can always tell." Zahira stayed completely still, hidden behind the doorway, her breath held. Elvira continued, her voice smooth. "The prince asked about her more than once, you know. Such attention is rarely innocent." Zahira felt her stomach drop. The other woman murmured, "Do you think something happened between them?" "That is what I intend to discover," Elvira replied. "The servant who hides languages must have secrets, and secrets can be dangerous in the wrong hands." Zahira's pulse pounded. She backed away before she could hear more, slipping quietly down the servant's passage with faster steps. She reached a stairwell and sat on the lowest step, trying to steady her shaking breath. The palace felt smaller with each passing hour. Omar, meanwhile, circled the outer courtyard with impatient strides. He questioned a gardener, a gate attendant, even the older cook who rarely left her kitchen. Each person shook their head, their nervousness obvious. He paused beneath an archway. "Why is everyone so afraid to speak of her?" he asked softly, mostly to himself. His advisor approached from behind. "Your Highness, you risk unsettling the staff. They do not understand your interest." "Neither do I," Omar admitted, "but I will not stop until I have answers." In the afternoon, Zahira delivered a tray of clean cups to the dining hall. She set them down quickly and prepared to leave, but two young servants blocked her path. "Is it true?" one whispered. "Did you speak the prince's language?" Zahira stiffened. "Who told you that?" "No one, but everyone is whispering. They say you understand him." Zahira kept her voice low. "Stop speaking of it. You will only bring trouble." "But is it true?" the other asked, leaning in. Zahira met their eyes firmly. "Forget whatever you heard." The girls stepped back, startled by the seriousness in her tone. Zahira walked past them with hurried steps, determined to reach the quieter part of the palace, but Omar was already approaching the dining hall from the opposite side. Zahira turned a corner and saw him several paces away. She froze for the briefest second, then stepped into the nearest doorway, an unused storage room. She pressed her back against the wall, breath tight. Omar paused at the intersection, as though sensing movement. He looked down the hall Zahira had just left, his gaze sharp. His attention lingered there long enough to make her pulse throb painfully. He took one slow step toward that corridor, then another. Zahira held her breath. A steward called for him from behind. Omar turned reluctantly. "Yes? The evening seating arrangements need your review, Your Highness." Omar exhaled, frustrated. "I will come shortly." The steward bowed and walked away. Omar glanced once more down the empty hall before turning aside. Zahira waited until his steps faded completely. Then she slipped out and hurried toward the servants' wing, her heart still pounding. She reached the small courtyard near the laundry house just as the sun began to lower. She allowed herself a brief moment of stillness, listening to the distant hum of preparation. But the moment did not last. Voices approached from the upper walkway above the courtyard. Zahira recognized one instantly. Elvira. "And if the prince seeks her again, he should be warned," Elvira said calmly. Zahira froze where she stood. Rumor carried through a palace faster than any messenger, and Zahira felt its weight the moment she stepped into the servants' hall. Every conversation softened when she approached. Every glance drifted quickly away. She pretended not to notice, but her heartbeat gave her away. Something had shifted, and the shift had a name, Doña Elvira. By mid-morning, the tension grew sharper. Zahira fetched towels from the laundry, only to find two maids whispering with their heads close together. The moment she entered, they straightened and scattered. She continued folding, keeping her breathing even until one of them returned hesitantly. "Zahira," the girl said in a low voice, "Elvira asked about you again." Zahira did not look up. "What did she say?" "That you hide things." That there is something odd about you. Zahira's hands paused over a towel. Odd? What did she mean? The girl shook her head quickly. I do not know, and I do not want to know. She stepped back. But be careful. When Elvira takes an interest in someone, it never ends well. The girl hurried away, leaving Zahira alone with the growing storm of unease. She set down the towel and closed her eyes for a brief second. She had survived worse than palace gossip, but palace gossip, guided by someone like Elvira, was not trivial. It was a weapon without a blade and therefore all the more dangerous. She finished her task and left the room early, hoping to escape the murmurs. But the corridor outside was no kinder. 2 footmen spoke in hushed tones until they saw her. One stepped aside, the other pretended to adjust a painting on the wall, though both stared after her with curiosity. Zahira forced herself to appear calm, though her stomach tightened. What had Elvira said? What had she guessed? And why was the noblewoman so quick to involve herself in the affairs of a maid? The only person who seemed as restless as she was moved on the opposite side of the palace. Prince Omar. He had asked 3 attendants about her since sunrise. One had shrugged helplessly, another had blushed and stammered. The last had recommended he ask the housekeeper. Omar had dismissed that idea immediately. The housekeeper, he suspected, would tell him nothing. By noon his patience was thinning. He entered the inner courtyard alone and spotted a gardener trimming a vine. You, Omar called gently. Have you seen the girl who dropped the jar yesterday? The gardener straightened quickly. Many girls work here, Your Highness. The one who spoke Arabic. The man blinked and shook his head. I did not know any servant could. Omar exhaled sharply. Is there no one in this palace who knows her name? The gardener stepped back uncomfortable, and Omar gave up, walking away with tense strides. He was not used to being ignored, not used to chasing answers, and certainly not used to feeling as though he had offended someone he barely knew. Meanwhile, Zahira carried a basket of table linens through a smaller passage to avoid the main halls. But halfway down the corridor, she heard footsteps approaching, fast, purposeful, familiar. Her heart jumped. She ducked into an alcove behind a row of tall urns just before Omar appeared at the far end. He slowed, scanning the corridor with a thoughtful frown. He spoke to himself again, quiet but certain. She is avoiding me. Zahira held her breath. She knew he was right, and the truth unsettled her deeply. She had no wish to provoke his curiosity, yet every attempt to stay hidden only seemed to sharpen his determination. Omar turned away reluctantly and continued on. The moment he disappeared, Zahira slipped out, walking in the opposite direction with quickened steps. She reached the sewing room in search of a place to breathe. But Doña Elvira was already there. The noblewoman stood near the window, speaking to a seamstress, her tone light and sweet. Too sweet. Zahira immediately took a step back, but Elvira's gaze found her. Oh, Elvira said, smiling faintly. There you are. Zahira bowed her head. Good afternoon, my lady. Elvira dismissed the seamstress with a flick of her fingers. When the room was empty, she approached Zahira with unhurried steps. You have been elusive today. I have been working, my lady. Of course. Elvira studied her as though examining a curious artifact. Tell me something. How does a maid from Granada speak Arabic with such refinement? Zahira kept her features neutral. My parents taught me. Your parents. Elvira let out a soft, doubtful hum. And where did they learn it? The market, the taverns, or perhaps some mysterious scholar wandered into your childhood home? Zahira's pulse quickened. My parents were from an Arab settlement. They spoke it at home. Elvira watched her closely, searching for cracks. How convenient. And yet your accent was not that of peasants. It was polished, precise, almost noble. Zahira clasped her hands tightly. I cannot speak for what you hear, my lady. Elvira stepped closer. I do not care for evasive answers. They invite suspicion, and suspicion invites danger. Do you understand me? Zahira met her gaze briefly. I mean no harm. Oh, I am certain of that. Elvira smiled again, but her eyes remained cold. But harm does not always come from intent. Sometimes it comes from secrets. Zahira said nothing. Elvira leaned slightly forward. The prince asks for you. That alone concerns me. A diplomat cannot afford distractions. not when tensions between kingdoms stand so delicately balanced. Zahira kept her voice steady. I do not seek his attention. I believe you, Elvira said calmly. But he seeks you. And before he finds you, I intend to know precisely what he would be finding. She turned and walked toward the door. Zahira breathed in slowly, but her hands still trembled. Elvira stopped at the threshold without looking back. Be careful, she said. Mystery is a luxury servants cannot afford. Then she left. Zahira stood motionless for several seconds. She had always feared the wrong kind of eyes falling upon her. Now two pairs had, the prince's and Elvira's. One was curious, the other was dangerous, and both threatened the fragile anonymity she had built. She forced herself to resume work. Staying still only invited more questions. She spent the next hour in the storage hall, sorting candles and polishing brass holders. But each creak in the corridor made her turn her head. Each shadow in the doorway tightened her breath. In the late afternoon, she stepped into the small garden near the servants' entrance to gather fresh herbs for the kitchen. The air carried the quiet hum of bees, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. But then she heard voices drifting from the upper walkway. The prince seeks her, Elvira said. Her tone was hushed, but sharp enough to cut through the rustling leaves. Zahira froze with her basket in hand. Elvira continued, He must be warned before he does something foolish. Another voice murmured uncertainly, Warned? About what? That girl hides something. I am certain of it. Zahira's chest tightened. A pause. Then the other voice asked, What danger could a maid pose? Elvira's answer came quietly, but with chilling certainty. A danger wrapped in silence is the most dangerous of all. Zahira felt the blood drain from her face. She stood unmoving among the rosemary plants, hearing every word as though Elvira whispered them beside her. The conversation faded as the two women walked away. Zahira stayed rooted to the spot, her heartbeat hammering. She knew Elvira's curiosity would not end here. It would grow, it would spread. And soon Zahira would no longer have the luxury of avoiding Omar's questions, because others would ask far crueler ones first. She clutched the basket tightly. Warned about what? Zahira spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the palace as if the walls themselves listened. She kept her steps soft, her face calm, her tasks precise. But inside, tension coiled tighter with every hour. Elvira's words haunted her. The prince's persistence shadowed her, and the palace, once a place where she blended easily into the flow of servants, now felt like a narrowing corridor with no exit. By dusk, the hallways glowed with the warm light of oil lamps. Servants hurried to prepare the small meeting chambers, laying fresh cloths and setting pitchers of cooled water. Zahira carried a stack of linens toward one such chamber, praying no one of importance would be inside. But when she reached the doorway, she stopped short. Prince Omar stood at the far table with two advisors reviewing scrolls. His presence filled the room even though he remained silent, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Zahira stepped back quickly, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But one advisor raised his head. There is the girl now, Your Highness. Omar turned at once. Zahira froze. Their eyes met across the distance, and the air seemed to tighten. She did the only thing she could. She lowered her gaze and bowed lightly, preparing to retreat. Stay, Omar said. His tone wasn't sharp, but it held enough authority to stop her mid-step. The advisors exchanged looks. One murmured something about reviewing documents elsewhere. Omar nodded without taking his eyes off Zahira. When the door closed behind them, the room felt too still. Zahira held the stack of linens close to her chest. Your Highness, I was only delivering these. I have searched for you all day, Omar interrupted quietly. Yet you slip away every time I approach. She kept her gaze on the floor. I did not mean to cause inconvenience. You meant to avoid me. She hesitated. You are a prince. I am a servant. I only wish to stay out of your path. That is not the truth, he said, stepping closer. But perhaps you intend to keep truths from me. Zahira's breath caught. I intend nothing harmful. Then answer one question. His voice softened, though his insistence did not. Who taught you Arabic, the way you speak it? Her heart pounded. She stared at a pattern in the stone floor, hoping the silence between them might end the conversation. But Omar waited, and she felt the weight of his patience like another presence in the room. He took another step toward her. "Your accent is not common. It is the accent of scholars, of families who value history and tradition. So I ask again, who taught you?" "My parents," she said quietly. Omar's eyes narrowed slightly. "I believe your parents spoke Arabic. That much is possible. But they did not teach you classical phrasing. They did not teach you the tone of someone who studied texts, not conversations. I know the difference." Zahira swallowed hard. "Language grows with practice. And where did you practice?" he pressed gently. She lifted her gaze just enough to meet his eyes, though only for a moment. "Not here." Omar exhaled. It wasn't frustration, it was realization. "You were educated," he murmured. "You received instruction. That is not something a servant hides without reason." Zahira tightened her grip on the linens. "My reasons are personal." "Personal," he repeated softly. "Yet somehow dangerous enough that you avoid my questions." Zahira took half a step back. "I do not wish to disrupt your duties, Your Highness." "You already have," he said. "I cannot lead negotiations while thinking only of the servant who answers like a scholar and then runs from me." The confession startled her more than anger would have. Omar noticed the reaction and straightened slightly. "I do not mean to frighten you. I mean only to understand you." "I do not wish to be understood," Zahira whispered. "Why not?" "Because understanding invites curiosity." Her eyes flickered toward the door, thinking of Elvira. "And curiosity invites questions I cannot answer." Omar studied her for a long moment, realizing there was fear beneath her composure. "Not of him, of someone else." "Who threatens you?" "No one," she said quickly. He stepped closer again. "Then why fear being known?" "Because once someone knows your story," Zahira said softly, "they can use it." The room fell silent. Omar nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Have you hide because you survived something?" Her breath stilled. He didn't speak with accusation. He spoke with certainty, and Zahira realized the prince was not asking as a nobleman demanding obedience. He was asking as someone who recognized the shadow in her voice. "Zahira," he said more gently, "I do not seek to expose you, only to understand what happened that taught you to fear your own truth." She looked away. "You ask too much." "Then tell me only a small part," he offered. "One answer, one moment, anything that will keep others from spinning stories that harm you." Her pulse raced. "Others?" He hesitated. "There are people in this palace who question your presence, who wonder why you hide your education." She closed her eyes briefly. "Elvira." "Yes," he confirmed. "She seems determined to know more about you, and she has the influence to twist half-truths into accusations." Zahira opened her eyes, tension tightening every line of her posture. "I have no desire to become the subject of noble intrigues." "Then speak with me," Omar insisted. "Let me protect you." Those last words unsettled her deeply. "You cannot protect someone you do not know," she said quietly. His gaze softened. "Then let me know you." She shook her head. "Your Highness, enough formality," he said. "We speak alone." "There is no audience here." Zahira's voice trembled slightly. "I cannot give you what you ask." Omar took one final step closer, close enough that she felt the shift of the air between them, though he did not touch her. "I am not asking for your secrets," he said, "only for honesty." She raised her chin slowly. Her eyes met his fully for the first time since the jar shattered at his feet, and for a moment neither spoke. She searched his face. He searched hers, and between them formed a fragile bridge, wider than the space they stood in, and more dangerous than either wished to admit. Zahira inhaled unsteadily. "If I tell you the truth," she said, "you will not like it." "I do not seek comfort," he replied, "only truth." She looked down at the linens in her arms. Her fingers tightened around the fabric until her knuckles whitened. At last she spoke, her voice low but unwavering. "I learned Arabic from scholars," she said. "I grew up surrounded by books and manuscripts. My family valued knowledge more than gold, and I lost everything that allowed me to speak the way I do." Omar's expression changed, softening with both understanding and concern. "You were displaced?" Zahira nodded once. "And I do not wish that past dragged into the open by noble gossip." Omar's voice lowered. You should have told me this from the beginning. I did not trust you, she admitted. He accepted this with a quiet nod. Then start to trust me now. I cannot, she said. He lifted his chin slightly. Why? Her voice turned almost fragile. Because if the truth were known, it could cost more than you imagine. Omar stared at her, startled by the depth in her tone. Cost what? But Zahira stepped back, the distance immediate and intentional. I have said enough, she whispered. And before Omar could reach for another question, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the dim chamber, staring after her with a confusion that stirred into something heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. Her final words echoed through him long after she disappeared. If the truth were known, it could cost more than you imagine. The palace woke early, humming with preparations for the diplomatic meetings to come, yet Prince Omar barely heard the bustle around him. Zahira's final words from the previous evening clung to him like a thread he could not snap. If the truth were known, it could cost more than you imagine. He replayed them again and again as he met with his advisors in a smaller council chamber. Scrolls lay open before him, maps spread across the table. But instead of discussing trade routes and political greetings, he found himself staring at the inked lines as if they were written in a language he had never learned. His advisor cleared his throat politely. Your Highness, if we delay the review much longer, the embassy from Cordoba may take offense. Omar blinked and forced himself upright. Yes, continue. The advisor frowned but kept speaking. He opened a leather pouch containing documents the palace archivist had sent, old agreements, ancestral letters, copied treaties. A few had frayed edges that suggested they had been retrieved from the palace's deeper shelves. As Omar sifted through them, something unusual caught his eye. A loose parchment tucked between two heavy scrolls. The page looked different, its ink darker, its script more elegant than the clumsy handwriting found in most administrative documents. Omar lifted it gently. This page, what is it? The advisor came closer. A misplaced fragment, perhaps. The archivist said some papers were found tucked together in the wrong folio. Omar examined the delicate lines of Arabic across the page. The handwriting was beautiful, balanced, precise, controlled. The script leaned slightly to the right, every letter shaped with the precision of someone trained to copy manuscripts with honor and care. It was the handwriting of someone educated, someone who understood the art of preserving knowledge. Someone like Zahira. At the bottom corner of the page, barely visible in the faded ink, was a tiny initial. Z. Omar's breath stilled. Where was this found? He asked sharply. The advisor straightened. Among the palace's old storage chests. It must have been tucked inside years ago. Omar looked again at the initial, then at the careful script. He had seen handwriting like this only once before, on the servants' roster in the laundry house. Zahira's signature had been small and humble, but the strokes were the same. He folded the page slowly. Leave me a moment. The advisor hesitated. Your Highness, alone. The advisor bowed and withdrew from the room. When the door shut, Omar rested both hands on the table and stared at the parchment with a growing sense of clarity. This was not a coincidence. Zahira had lived among manuscripts once. She had admitted as much the night before. But she had said nothing about having copied them. Nothing about the level of education her handwriting clearly revealed. Why had she hidden that detail? And how had this page, bearing her initial, ended up in the palace archives? Omar folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into his inner coat. He left the council room with determined steps, ignoring the advisors who called after him. He had questions, and he would no longer accept half answers. Zahira, meanwhile, was in the laundry hall sorting freshly dried linens. Her supervisor hovered nearby, giving her strained glances that Zahira pretended not to notice. The air felt heavy, as if everyone sensed a storm forming somewhere in the palace. A young maid entered, carrying a tray of towels. She approached Zahira hesitantly. I heard the prince looking for you again, she whispered. Twice. Zahira's hands paused over a folded sheet. What did he say? Only that he had something important to ask you. The girl bit her lip. He didn't sound angry, more like determined. Zahira closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you. I don't understand why he insists on speaking to you, the girl murmured. You barely said anything to him. Zahira offered a small, weary smile. Sometimes very little can say too much. The girl left and Zahira returned to her work, though her thoughts seemed louder than the rustle of linens around her. She knew Omar would come, perhaps today, perhaps in the next hour. And after Elvira's growing suspicions, Zahira feared that avoiding him would only worsen her situation. When the first shadow crossed the doorway, Zahira did not look up. When the footsteps grew louder, she forced her hands to keep folding. But when the room fell silent, too silent, she finally lifted her gaze. Prince Omar stood in the doorway, holding a small, folded parchment in his hand. Her breath caught. Every servant in the laundry hall froze at once. Some bowed. Others hurried to appear busy. The supervisor stepped forward immediately. "Your Highness," the woman stammered, "forgive the disorder." Omar raised a hand, stopping her. His eyes remained fixed on Zahira. "I need a moment with her," he said. The supervisor's eyes widened, but she nodded quickly. "Of course, come everyone, allow His Highness the room." The servants dispersed with murmured apologies, leaving Zahira standing alone beside the linen table. When the door finally shut behind the last of them, the room felt twice as large. Zahira lowered her head. "Your Highness, you should not be here." "On the contrary," Omar replied, stepping closer. "This is exactly where I must be." She swallowed hard. "I do not wish to cause attention." "You already have." His tone softened. "And it is not of your doing." He reached into his coat and unfolded the parchment. Zahira froze completely when she saw the script. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In the archives," Omar replied, "among documents prepared for the negotiations." "Misplaced," they said. He watched her reaction carefully. "But I do not believe in coincidences." Zahira stepped back, instinctively creating distance. Her pulse hammered in her throat. "That page was never meant to leave my mother's belongings. It should not be here. Then it is yours." She exhaled shakily. "Yes." He waited, allowing her to continue. "It is a copy," she said quietly. "One of many I wrote as a child. My father believed that knowledge must be preserved. He taught me to copy manuscripts so our history would not fade." Omar listened, absorbing each word. Zahira continued, her voice steady but solemn. "When my family fled, I kept a few pages hidden, but I lost track of some things after they died. I do not know how that one reached the palace." Omar studied her, her expression, her trembling hands, the weight she seemed to carry. "You were raised as a scholar's daughter," he said, "not a maid." She nodded once. "Then why come here as a servant?" Zahira closed her eyes briefly. "Because I had nowhere else to go." Omar's chest tightened. She lowered her gaze. "I thought if I hid what I knew, I could live quietly. No one would ask questions. No one would suspect me of anything. But they do now," he said. Zahira's throat tightened. "Elvira suspects something," Omar continued, stepping closer. "She senses your education, and she will not stop until she discovers more." Zahira's hands clenched at her sides. "That is why I cannot speak openly. She intends to make trouble," Omar warned softly. "I know." Zahira's voice trembled. "But trouble grows faster in silence," he added. She closed her eyes again, hurt by how true that was. He unfolded the parchment fully and placed it on the table between them. "Zahira, I do not wish to expose your past, but I cannot protect you if you keep me in the dark." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a mixture of fear and something deeper, something like yearning for relief. "I do not need protection," she whispered. "Yes," he said gently. "You do." She drew a slow breath. "And if I tell you everything, what then?" "Then," he replied, "I will know how to keep Elvira from turning your life into a weapon." Zahira hesitated. Her eyes lingered on the parchment, the handwriting that belonged to a world she had lost. She lifted it slowly, her fingers brushing the familiar ink. "It was part of a manuscript my father treasured," she said softly. "He believed it held pieces of an older understanding between kingdoms, nothing political but meaningful, a reminder of shared roots. I copied it so it would not be forgotten." Omar listened intently. "When we fled, I carried only fragments. I buried them with him when he died. Only a few remained with my mother. And when we arrived here, she hid them too." Zahira's voice wavered. "After she passed, the belongings were taken by the palace steward. I never saw them again. Omar's brow tightened. So the palace acquired your family's manuscripts without knowing what they were? Yes. He looked at the parchment again. This fragment, it is beautiful work. Zahira lowered her gaze. Omar exhaled slowly. Zahira, this changes everything. These manuscripts could matter in the negotiations. They speak of shared history, mutual respect, things this meeting desperately needs. That is why I hid them, she whispered. Knowledge can unite, but it can also be twisted. He nodded, understanding at last. She lifted her eyes. What will you do with it? Nothing without your consent, Omar said firmly. But I must ask, did anyone else know you kept these? No, Zahira said. No one but my mother. He stepped a little closer. Zahira, someone placed this page in the very stack of documents meant for my eyes. That cannot be an accident. Zahira's breath halted. What are you saying? I'm saying someone in this palace wants your past uncovered. Her heart pounded. He held her gaze. And I intend to find out who. Zahira stiffened when she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway outside. Omar turned toward the doorway, just as a shadow moved past the crack beneath it. He stepped forward, opening the door sharply, only to find the corridor empty. But Zahira's face had already gone pale. She stared at the door. Someone heard us. Zahira's whisper hung in the air, fragile as thin glass. Someone heard us. Omar stepped into the hallway again, scanning both directions. Only a servant carrying a tray hurried around the far corner, far too distant to have lingered by the door. The corridor looked harmless, but Zahira's instinct was rarely wrong. She had lived too long in watchfulness not to know when a shadow didn't belong. He closed the door, his expression sharpening with determination. If someone listened, they would not have fled in silence. They would have waited to be discovered, to create some noise to excuse their presence. Not if they wanted to remain unseen, Zahira murmured. And who in this palace gains anything from hiding in shadows to overhear you? Omar asked. She didn't need to think. Elvira. He nodded once. Then we must assume she is digging deeper. Zahira clasped her hands tightly. If she learns the truth, she will use it, not to help her kingdom, not to help yours, but simply to hurt. Omar moved closer, lowering his voice. I will not give her the chance. Zahira looked away. You cannot stop her. No one stops her. I can, he insisted. You don't understand the way these walls work. Zahira whispered. You are new here. You see power as a title. Elvira sees it as a game, and she does not lose. Omar absorbed her words, but his resolve didn't waver. She will lose this time. Zahira shook her head softly. Not if she reveals my past first. Omar leaned against the table, arms folding. Then you must tell me the whole truth. Not the edges, not the fragments, everything. Only then can I protect you. Zahira's breath faltered. The room felt smaller. She had offered Omar pieces of her story, but the rest she had buried so deeply that speaking it aloud seemed like betrayal. Of her parents, of her survival, of the silence she had sworn to keep. He watched her struggle, and his tone gentled. I am not your enemy. I know, she said. Then why hide from me? She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes held more sadness than fear. Because truth binds people, and I cannot afford bonds. Omar stepped closer, lowering his voice. I am not asking for you to bind yourself to me, only to trust me with what Elvira already suspects. Zahira shook her head. She suspects nothing. She only sees an opportunity. A dangerous combination, Omar said, which is why I must know what she hopes to uncover. Zahira's fingers fidgeted with the fabric of her sleeve, a small involuntary gesture that betrayed her turmoil. Omar waited patiently. He didn't press. He didn't demand. He simply watched her with quiet sincerity. Please, he said softly, tell me. She inhaled slowly through her nose, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. My father served as a scholar to a regional council near the coast. He wrote treaties, preserved histories, interpreted older agreements no one else could read. He believed diplomacy depended on stories, shared stories, and he carried many of them. Omar nodded quietly, urging her to continue. When conflict reached our region, my father refused to choose sides. He only tried to preserve the documents, the histories, the records. Her throat tightened. He believed losing knowledge was worse than losing land. Omar's gaze softened. A brave belief. A foolish one, Zahira whispered, because those who wanted power cared nothing for stories. They only cared for silence. Omar caught the shift in her tone. What happened to your family? Zahira drew a deep breath, steadying herself. I was 12 when the fighting began. My father hid the manuscripts in small fragments, sending them with trusted friends, scattering them so no one person held too much knowledge. He taught me to copy his most precious writings in case he could not keep the originals safe. She looked down at her hands. I copied that page, she said, gesturing to the fragment resting on the table. And others, all with the intention that someone, anyone, might keep the past alive. Omar listened closely. When the unrest grew worse, we fled, she continued. My mother carried what little she could. My father stayed behind to protect the remaining records. Her voice strained. He never returned. Omar felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Zahira swallowed, trying to remain composed. After he disappeared, my mother and I arrived in Granada with nothing but a few fragments hidden among our clothing. She took work where she could. I helped her. When she fell ill, I cared for her. After she died, the palace steward took our belongings to assess what could be sold or used. Her eyes glimmered with restrained pain. I begged him not to touch the manuscripts, but he said everything left behind belonged to the palace. Omar exhaled slowly. That is how your page ended up in the archives, he said. Zahira nodded. Yes. And you feared anyone discovering it? She nodded again. Because if they knew we carried knowledge tied to families still in conflict, questions would follow. Allegiances would be assumed, accusations would be made, and I only wanted peace. Omar stepped closer, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Zahira, what you carry is not a threat, it is a treasure. To you, she whispered, but not to those who see danger in every foreign word. He clenched his jaw. Elvira. Zahira closed her eyes briefly. She will twist this. She will claim I hid political ties. She will say my knowledge is a threat. Omar shook his head. Not if I speak first. You cannot defend me, Zahira insisted. Not without exposing everything. Then expose it with my support. She looked at him sharply. And risk your own position? Your negotiations? Your name? If protecting you jeopardizes all that, he said, then I must question the value of the things I am here to achieve. Zahira stared at him, stunned. Omar held her gaze firmly. But before she could gather words, heavy footsteps approached, stopping directly outside the door. Zahira stiffened. Omar turned toward the hallway. Whoever is there, show yourself. Silence answered. Zahira shook her head urgently. Please, don't draw more attention. Omar ignored the warning and opened the door quickly. A junior footman stood frozen in the hall, eyes wide as if caught stealing treasure. Were you listening? Omar demanded. The boy shook his head rapidly. No, Your Highness. I only came to deliver a message. Omar stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. To whom? To you, sir, the boy stammered. Lady Elvira asks for your presence in the main salon at once. She said the matter concerns diplomatic integrity. Zahira felt the blood drain from her face. Omar noticed. What does she know? He asked the boy sharply. I do not know, Your Highness. Only that she insisted the matter was urgent. Omar stepped back into the laundry hall, closing the door behind him. Zahira stood motionless, the color slowly returning to her cheeks, but her panic still raw. She knows something, Zahira whispered. Omar spoke through clenched teeth. She knows enough to think she can use it. Zahira's hands trembled. What if she overheard you reading my manuscript? What if she saw the page? What if she... She will not attack you openly, Omar said. Not yet. She is gathering pieces. She wishes to corner you without showing her hand. Zahira hugged her arms tightly around herself. She does not need truth to destroy, only suspicion. Then let me confront her, Omar said. If she intends harm, you must not confront her directly, Zahira pleaded. If you react too strongly, she will know her suspicions are true. He paused. She was right. Omar stepped closer, lowering his voice. Zahira, I will not let her twist your past into a threat. I should never have spoken, Zahira whispered, tears touched by anger and fear. I should never have answered you that day. If I had remained silent— No, he said firmly. You should not have needed to stay silent. Zahira lowered her gaze. Omar gently touched the parchment on the table. Whoever placed this page here did so with intention, he murmured. Someone wants your secret exposed. Or wants you to believe it is exposed, Zahira said. Omar's jaw tightened. Either way, this is no longer something you can face alone. She looked up at him with weary eyes. What choice do I have? Omar held her gaze. I will come for you tonight, he said quietly, after the sun sets. Somewhere we can speak without walls listening. You cannot, she whispered. Elvira already suspects too much. I will not risk being absent, he replied, and I will not let her move unchecked. Zahira swallowed. Where? The old courtyard, he said. The one behind the eastern cloister. Few servants go there after dark. Zahira hesitated. If we are seen— We won't be, Omar promised. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, knowing she was stepping toward a path she had vowed never to walk. Omar reached for the parchment again and slipped it back into his coat. I will keep this safe, he said. Zahira's voice came soft and hollow. Nothing is safe now. He looked at her with a mixture of resolve and something deeper, something he could not yet name. I will meet you at twilight, he said. Zahira wanted to argue. She wanted to refuse, but fear had already woven too tightly around her to unravel now. When she finally nodded, it was not agreement. It was surrender to inevitability. Footsteps echoed again in the corridor. Omar stepped away from her, straightened his coat, and moved toward the door. But before he opened it, Zahira whispered one last plea. If Elvira has learned anything, she will strike soon. Omar glanced back. That is why I must speak to her now. Zahira shook her head. Whatever you do not let her know what you have. Omar nodded once. He opened the door and stepped out. Zahira remained in the empty laundry hall, hands trembling, knowing the sun had not yet set, and already the shadows were moving. Someone had heard them. The palace swelled with preparations for the grand diplomatic banquet. Servants rushed through corridors, carrying trays of polished silverware and folded linens. Musicians rehearsed soft melodies in distant chambers. Nobles arrived in carriages that glittered under the rising moon. The entire estate pulsed with expectation, yet Zahira felt none of its beauty. All day she carried a weight she struggled to hide. Omar's warning, Elvira's scheming, the misplaced manuscript page. Each piece had tightened around her like a snare. She moved with careful steps, avoiding crowded halls, hoping invisibility might shield her a little longer. But visibility was no longer hers to choose. As the afternoon matured into evening, Elvira drifted through the palace like a woman hunting a scent. Zahira felt her presence before she saw her. Every time she turned a corner, someone whispered Elvira's name. Every time she bent her head to work, she sensed eyes on her back. By dusk, Zahira's unease reached its peak. She collected freshly folded linens and headed toward the banquet hall. The soft glow of chandeliers filled the wide space as servants arranged the tables with precise symmetry. Zahira took her place among them, working quietly, hoping, praying that the evening would pass without incident. It did not. Elvira entered like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Her gown swept across the floor as she approached the long table. She murmured pleasant greetings to nobles, offered polite nods to advisers, and then paused when she saw Zahira smoothing a napkin. Silence rippled outward. Zahira immediately lowered her gaze, stepping back, but Elvira's voice, light, warm, dangerous, cut through the room. "Leave that," she said to Zahira. "I must speak with you." Every servant froze. The housekeeper blinked anxiously. Even the musicians in the corner faltered in their tune. Zahira bowed her head and stepped forward. "Yes, my lady?" Elvira studied her with a smile that never touched her eyes. "It seems some peculiar matters have reached my attention." Zahira forced her expression to remain neutral. "I do not understand." "You will," Elvira said softly. She lifted her voice just enough for nearby nobles to hear, without seeming intentional. "You see, I recently discovered that one of the palace maids has been keeping secrets, important ones." Zahira's breath tightened. The room leaned closer. Elvira continued, Imagine my surprise when I learned a servant, humble, untrained, unknown, has knowledge far beyond her station. Languages, for example. A whisper traveled across the hall like wind through reeds. Zahira straightened her back, though her hands trembled. "My lady, whatever you heard." "I heard," Elvira interrupted, "that you spoke to the prince in fluent Arabic, classical Arabic." She smiled thinly. "Almost as though you were raised among scholars." Several nobles exchanged startled glances. Servants looked away. Zahira felt the floor sway slightly beneath her feet. "My lady," Zahira said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "My family spoke—" "Ah, families," Elvira said. "Always the perfect excuse." Zahira's eyes burned, but she kept her composure. "I mean no disrespect, but whatever knowledge I possess, I did not give you permission to possess knowledge," Elvira said gently, as if correcting a child. "You are a servant. Your duties do not require understanding foreign tongues, let alone those reserved for councils and ancient texts." A nobleman nearby murmured, "Ancient texts?" Elvira's smile widened. "Yes, that is what concerns me most." She stepped closer to Zahira, her voice silk-wrapped steel. "I discovered something else today, something quite unsettling." The room quieted further, as though holding its breath. "A page," Elvira said, "written in Arabic script, beautifully copied, found among diplomatic documents." She raised her brows. "And signed only with the letter Z." Zahira's lungs froze. Few things could have humiliated her more than this moment. Her private past torn open before nobles who saw servants as shadows, her dignity pinned beneath Elvira's polished boot. "My lady," Zahira whispered, "you misunderstand." "I understand perfectly," Elvira said. "You have been hiding your education, your connections, your knowledge." Her voice sharpened. "What I do not understand is why." Nobles murmured louder now. Servants stepped back, distancing themselves from Zahira as though she carried a curse. The housekeeper finally stepped forward, her voice strained. "My lady, Zahira has served faithfully. She is no threat." Elvira shot her a cool look. "Blind loyalty does not erase suspicion." Zahira swallowed the rising ache in her throat. She looked at the nobles' faces, curiosity, judgment, mistrust. She saw the servants' fear, their desire not to be associated with her. She felt the humiliation settle deep in her skin, cold and sharp. "My lady," Zahira said softly, "I have harmed no one." Elvira tilted her head. "Then explain why you copied manuscripts worthy of scholars, why your handwriting appears in documents intended for diplomatic negotiations, why you hide abilities you should not possess." "I do not hide," Zahira said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Oh, you do," Elvira answered with a smile. "And people who hide knowledge often hide motives." Zahira's eyes widened faintly. "I have no motives." "Then you will not object," Elvira said, "if I request that the steward relieve you of your duties until further notice. We cannot risk allowing someone with unexamined loyalties to wander freely during such delicate negotiations." Zahira felt the world tilt. "That will not be necessary," a voice said sharply. The room turned. Prince Omar stood in the doorway. Conversation died. Servants froze. Zahira's breath caught in her throat. He walked forward with measured steps, his expression composed, but eyes dark with contained fire. Elvira's smile faltered for the first time. "Your Highness," she said sweetly, "forgive the interruption. I was merely protecting the integrity of tonight's banquet." "By publicly shaming a servant?" Omar asked calmly. "A servant whose only crime is speaking a language you do not understand?" Elvira stiffened. "You do not grasp the significance." "On the contrary," Omar cut in, "I grasp it completely." Zahira dared not breathe. He continued, "You accuse her of hiding knowledge, yet knowledge is not a crime, nor is dignity, nor is intelligence." Elvira's lips thinned. "You defend her rather fiercely, Your Highness." "I defend justice fiercely," he answered. Several nobles murmured in approval, sensing tension worth watching. Elvira stepped closer to Omar. "Your Highness, you forget that political risk is not always visible. A servant with secret education." Secret only because people like you punish anyone who rises above the limits you set, Omar replied. A ripple of shock spread through the hall. Elvira's cheeks colored. You presume much. I presume only that Zahira deserves the same respect you demand for yourself, Omar said. Silence followed. Then Omar turned slightly, addressing the nearby steward. She will not be removed from her duties. She will not be questioned, and she certainly will not be humiliated further. The steward nodded quickly. Yes, Your Highness. Elvira's eyes burned with cold fury. She smiled, slow, calculated. Very well, if that is your wish. But something in her voice made Zahira's stomach clench. Elvira lowered her head politely, but her eyes never left Zahira's face. I simply hope, she said softly, that your trust is not misplaced. Zahira's breath slowed. Omar stepped closer to her, too close for propriety but too distant for comfort. He murmured, Are you all right? She nodded once, though faintly. But before either could move, the doors to the banquet hall opened wider, and nobles poured in, their voices rising in anticipation of the evening's ceremony. The commotion separated them like a tide pulling back suddenly from the shore. Servants resumed their work in rushed movements. Omar was swept into the flow of diplomats waiting to greet him, and Zahira found herself standing alone in the center of the hall, eyes lowered, cheeks burning. Not from anger, but from humiliation so deep it seemed to carve itself into her bones. Whispers rose like smoke around her. Is she dangerous? Why did she hide it? How long has she lied? She backed away slowly, then turned, escaping toward the servants' wing. Her chest tightened with every step, but when she reached the quiet corridor behind the laundry hall, she stopped abruptly. Her small sleeping space, her tiny refuge, stood empty. Her few belongings had been removed, neatly folded, carefully placed, waiting for her on the floor, as if someone expected her to leave, as if someone believed she no longer belonged. Zahira closed her eyes, her breath breaking. Then she heard a soft sound behind her, footsteps approaching from the shadows. Zahira turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Someone stepped out of the shadows of the dim corridor. For an instant she feared Elvira had followed her, but it was not Elvira. It was Omar. He had slipped away from the banquet the moment he noticed she had vanished. Now, in the narrow passage lit only by a single lantern, he looked different, no longer the composed prince balancing diplomacy and duty, but a man carrying the weight of another's suffering on his shoulders. He saw the small pile of Zahira's belongings on the floor. His expression darkened. Who did this? Zahira knelt quickly, gathering her things with trembling hands. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said. She did not look at him. I should not have stayed in the main hall. My presence only caused trouble. No, he insisted. Elvira caused trouble, not you. Zahira shook her head. Everyone saw. Everyone heard. They will believe what she says. She has the voice. I am only a servant. Omar stepped closer. You are not only anything. Zahira swallowed hard and kept folding her few garments into a small bundle. A worn scarf slipped from her hands, one her mother had embroidered long ago, and she paused, staring at it as though it were the last piece of herself she could not hide. Zahira, he said softly, why were your things removed? She stood slowly, the bundle clutched against her chest. Someone thought I should be prepared, in case I was dismissed. A sharp breath escaped him. You are not dismissed. But I might be, she whispered. You won't be. You cannot promise that, she said, her voice breaking. Not after what happened tonight. Omar exhaled, fighting the urge to track down every servant in the palace until he knew who had moved her belongings. But he forced calm into his tone. Come, not here, we need privacy. No, she said quickly. If anyone sees, they will see nothing, he interrupted firmly. The banquet hall keeps all eyes occupied. We won't be missed. She hesitated, torn between fear and the part of her that needed to understand why the past she had kept buried for years was now clawing its way into the light. Omar extended a hand, not touching her, merely offering direction. Please, he said. Her heart pounded. She nodded. They walked through side corridors without speaking, their footsteps soft against the old stone. The palace felt different now, vast, echoing, heavy with secrets whispered behind closed doors. They reached a small unused courtyard hidden behind a cloister of arches. Moonlight washed the stones in silver, and a faint breeze moved through the air like a sigh. Zahira stopped beneath the archway, clutching her belongings. Omar turned to face her. "Tonight was wrong, cruel. What Elvira did—" "She only said what others already thought," Zahira murmured. "No, she shaped their thoughts." His jaw tightened. "And I allowed her the space to do it." Zahira shook her head. "You defended me. More than anyone ever has." "I did too little," he said. He stepped closer, leaving barely a breath of space between them. Seeing her like this, hurt, cornered, carrying burdens she never should have borne, stirred something fierce inside him. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Not because I demand it, but because I need to protect you from what comes next." She tightened her arms around her bundle. "I already told you, more than I ever told anyone. I need the rest," he said. "I need to understand why you believed your knowledge could destroy you." Zahira lowered her gaze, "Because it already destroyed everything else." He waited. She finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "When the conflict spread, the council my father served was accused of harboring information they never possessed. A rival faction believed they concealed records of old alliances, documents that could prove claims to contested lands. My father told the truth. He held nothing. They didn't believe him." Omar's breath stilled. He hid the manuscripts he had preserved, cultural writings, histories, poetry, nothing political, but they wanted something else, something that never existed. Zahira's fingers dug into the fabric she held. They took him. They demanded he surrender what he did not have. They kept him until he vanished. And those who blamed him turned their eyes to us. Omar stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You fled. We had no choice," she said. "We walked for days, weeks. My mother was weak, but we reached the coast, then Granada. She took work as a seamstress. I helped her. We tried to be invisible." Omar closed his eyes briefly, imagining a girl barely past childhood carrying a legacy she never asked for. "When she died," Zahira whispered, "I begged the steward to let me keep her things. But servants have no rights over their belongings once the debt of room and food is counted." "He should never have taken them," Omar said, his voice tight. She looked up at him. "But he did. And the fragments of my father's work, the pieces I kept hidden so no one could twist them, were scattered through the palace. And now, one of them has returned to me." Omar touched the inner pocket of his coat where the page rested. "I have it safe." Zahira closed her eyes again as relief and sorrow warred in her face. "You carry knowledge both kingdoms need," Omar said. "Not knowledge of war, knowledge of history, of unity." "Unity is what destroyed my family," she whispered. "No," he replied. "Those who sought to control history destroyed your family. There is a difference." She looked at him with pain lingering in her gaze. "You do not understand. If Elvira learns the truth, she will accuse me of being tied to factions still in conflict. She will say I hid alliances. She will say I carried dangerous history." "I will not allow it," he said. "You cannot stop the whispers." "But I can stop them from becoming weapons," he replied. Zahira stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't know how fast lies spread. You don't know how easily people believe them." "I know," he said quietly, "which is why I must speak before she does." Zahira's eyes widened in fear. "No, if you speak of me, of my past, you will give her the proof she wants. She will twist your words until I am condemned." "I will not condemn you," he said. "But she will," Zahira insisted. Omar stared at her, struggling between duty and something deeper, something that kept pulling him toward her no matter how far she stepped back. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to stay away," she said softly. The words struck him, unexpected and sharp. "Stay away?" he repeated. "Yes," she said. "If you continue to defend me, she will use it against you, and against me. I cannot survive another accusation." Omar drew closer again, unable to accept her retreat. "You would rather stand alone than let me help you?" "I'm used to standing alone," she said. "It is safer." "For whom?" he asked. "For you," she whispered. Omar exhaled slowly, the answer cutting deeper than she knew. "Zahira," he said, "I cannot protect you from afar." "You cannot protect me at all," she said. "No one can." He held her gaze, something fierce stirring behind his calm exterior. "Then let me try." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "Trying will cost you, and I will not be the reason you lose anything." He stepped forward, voice roughened by urgency. "Then let me lose something." She looked at him, stunned. Omar swallowed hard. "I cannot watch you be destroyed by lies when I know the truth." Zahira opened her mouth to speak, but the sound of a door slamming echoed across the courtyard. Both turned sharply. Elvira stood by the cloister arch, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. The lantern behind her cast long shadows across the stones. She had heard something, perhaps too much, and she was smiling. Elvira stepped fully into the courtyard, the rustle of her gown breaking the silence that had fallen between Zahira and Omar. Moonlight brushed her face, revealing not triumph, but something colder, certainty. The kind of certainty that came from believing she had already won. Omar moved slightly in front of Zahira without thinking, his posture protective, steady, unmistakable. Elvira noticed. Her smile sharpened. "Well," she murmured, "this is far more interesting than I imagined." Zahira's breath trembled. Omar, composed but tense, met Elvira's gaze directly. "You followed us," he said. Elvira tilted her head. "When important matters concern the stability of this palace, yes, Your Highness, I follow." She folded her hands. "And tonight everything I suspected has been confirmed." Zahira stepped forward, though fear tightened her voice. "My lady, please." No, speak," Elvira said. "I am curious to hear how you plan to explain what I just witnessed." Omar cut in. "You witnessed nothing improper." "Improper," Elvira echoed. "Perhaps not, but unusual? Suspicious?" "Certainly." She glanced at Zahira. "A prince meeting a servant in secret. A servant who conveniently carries knowledge from conflicted lands. A servant whose handwriting appears on diplomatic manuscripts. A servant whose belongings are already packed for departure." Zahira flinched. Elvira spread her hands lightly. "Tell me, Your Highness, are these coincidences, or evidence of dangerous deceit?" "Enough," Omar said. "On the contrary," Elvira replied, "Granada deserves clarity." Her eyes moved back to Zahira. "You may hide behind humble posture, but you weave a complicated web, and webs are rarely innocent." Zahira lowered her gaze. "I hide nothing." Elvira gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You hide everything, and you expect us to believe you pose no threat." She turned to Omar. "You have defended her without knowing who she truly is." "I know enough," he said. "Do you?" Elvira stepped closer. "Because from where I stand, she is a danger to these negotiations." Zahira took a step back, voice shaking. "I do not wish to harm anyone." "That is precisely the line suspicious people use," Elvira said softly. Omar's eyes hardened. "You accuse her of treachery with no evidence." "I accuse her of deception," Elvira replied, "and that is evidence enough. A servant with hidden education, secret documents, ties to scholars in a contested region, and the ear of a foreign prince, that is not harmless." Zahira felt the humiliation rise again, like it had in the banquet hall, sharp, burning, uninvited. But this time she lifted her chin. "My knowledge is not political. My family preserved culture, not conflict." Elvira's smile faded. "Then why hide it?" "Because people like you twist truth into threat," Zahira whispered. Omar looked at her with a flicker of surprise and pride. Elvira's voice sharpened. "Did you hear that, Your Highness? She speaks as though she understands politics better than her betters. This is exactly why servants must remain in their place." Omar moved forward, his expression resolute. "Lady Elvira, your suspicions end tonight." "Oh?" she asked lightly. "You intend to stop me?" "I intend," Omar said firmly, "to ensure no innocent person suffers because of your ego or your envy." Her eyes flashed. "Envy?" "Yes," he said. "Because she commands a dignity you cannot crush, no matter how you try." Elvira's silence lasted a moment too long. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "You forget your position, Your Highness. As a guest in this palace, your voice carries influence, not authority." But Omar did not waver. Then I will use every bit of influence I have. Zahira tugged softly at his sleeve, alarmed. Please, do not provoke her. Elvira looked almost pleased by Zahira's fear. You see, even she knows her fate depends on the goodwill of others. Omar stepped back beside Zahira, his tone steady. Her fate depends on truth. And tonight, I will speak it. Elvira's brows arched. I look forward to hearing this truth. Omar drew a calm breath. Zahira's knowledge comes from her father, a scholar who preserved cultural manuscripts during times of unrest. What she carries is not political leverage. It is history, heritage, nothing more. And you believe her? Elvira asked. I do, he answered. Zahira looked down, her throat tight. Elvira circled slowly, examining them as though assessing pieces on a chessboard. Even if what you say is true, her presence still poses risk. People fear what they do not understand, and she has already become a source of unrest. Not because of her, Omar countered. Because of you. Elvira turned sharply. I protect Granada. You protect your pride, he said. Zahira flinched, expecting Elvira to erupt in fury. But instead the noblewoman smiled faintly as though amused. You are young, Your Highness, she said, and youth often mistakes defiance for bravery. Omar stood his ground. And age often mistakes cruelty for wisdom. Something in Elvira's expression cracked, just briefly. An old wound, perhaps, or simply wounded pride. She exhaled slowly. Very well. Believe what you wish. But tomorrow, when the council gathers, I will not remain silent. They will know that this girl hides a foreign education and connections she never declared, and they will decide if she remains here. Zahira's breath stopped. My lady, please. Elvira raised a hand. If you wished mercy, you should have kept your secrets more carefully. Omar stepped forward. You will cause damage to an innocent woman. Perhaps, Elvira said, but better one woman suffer injustice than a kingdom suffer uncertainty. I will not let that happen, he said quietly. Elvira paused. Her eyes moved between them, reading something unsaid. Then she gave a slow, knowing smile. It seems I have understood far more than you intended me to. Zahira stiffened. Omar's expression darkened. Leave her alone. Elvira stepped back toward the cloister arch. I will leave her for tonight, but tomorrow her fate will be decided publicly. She turned to leave, but then paused and looked directly at Zahira. You should prepare yourself, she said. People will ask questions you cannot answer. Omar moved instantly. Elvira... But she had already vanished into the shadows, her footsteps echoing down the stone hall. The courtyard fell into a heavy silence. Zahira stood still, shoulders trembling, not from fear now, but from exhaustion. An exhaustion born of years of running from the past and hours of running from Elvira. Omar approached her gently. She will not succeed. She will, Zahira whispered. People listen to her. They trust her voice more than mine. Then I will speak louder, he said. You cannot. Zahira shook her head. If you defend me again, she will claim I have manipulated you, that I used my knowledge to gain your favor. She will twist everything. Omar hesitated. Zahira continued more softly. And if she turns others against you, your mission here will fail. Your kingdom needs you to succeed. I will not be the reason you falter. You are not a burden, he said. But I could become one, she whispered. He clenched his fists lightly, struggling against the truth she spoke. Zahira bent to gather her belongings again, but her hands faltered. Omar knelt beside her without a word and helped her pick up the scarf, the folded garments, the little wooden comb she treasured. When everything was gathered, Zahira held the bundle tightly, her breathing uneven. You should return to the banquet, she whispered. I cannot leave you like this, he said. You must, she insisted. He rose slowly. Zahira, she stood as well, facing him. Her eyes were calm now, too calm, as though she had accepted a sentence she had not yet heard. I will face whatever comes tomorrow, she said. You will not face it alone, he replied. She shook her head. You cannot stand beside me in front of them. It will ruin you. Let it, he said. Her breath caught. Do not say that. I mean it. She looked away, fighting tears she didn't want him to see. Please. For both our sakes, do not risk yourself again. Omar's chest tightened. I cannot stop caring. Her eyes lifted with quiet anguish. But you must. He stared at her, unable to form an answer. Slowly she stepped back, not pushing him away, but preparing herself for what the morning would bring. Zahira had been humiliated, stripped of safety, exposed to suspicion, but she refused to let Omar suffer because of her. And despite everything, a strange calm settled over her. Elvira had done her worst. Now Zahira would endure whatever came next. Omar remained silent, but something in his expression shifted, like a vow forming behind his eyes. He would not abandon her. He would not step aside. And tomorrow, he would challenge whatever judgment awaited Zahira, even if she begged him not to. He stood with her in the quiet courtyard, the moonlight casting long shadows around them, and neither spoke. The night held its breath, knowing tomorrow would change everything. The palace awakened with a tension that felt almost audible. The council meeting had been announced at dawn, earlier than expected, earlier than necessary. Nobles hurried through the corridors in hurried clusters. Advisors sharpened their arguments like blades. Servants carried trays with nervous hands. Everyone sensed something was about to break. Zahira dressed quietly in her small corner of the servants' quarters. Someone had returned her belongings during the night, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of fear of the prince's reaction, but the gesture did nothing to ease her heart. She braided her hair with steady fingers. The motions calmed her. It was her mother's way, order in the face of chaos, beauty in the face of endings. She stepped out into the corridor, clutching her scarf, ready to walk toward whatever awaited her. But Omar was waiting first. He stood near the servants' wing, a place no prince should linger. His posture was rigid, his expression carved with determination. When he saw her, the tension in his shoulders eased just slightly. "You weren't at breakfast," he said. "I was not hungry," she replied. He studied her face. "You didn't sleep. Neither did you." He allowed a small exhale of truth to escape. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I must speak today." "You must not," she said immediately. "I begged you, and I refused your plea," he interrupted gently. "I cannot remain silent while they tear you apart with false suspicions." She held his gaze, her voice soft with fear. "If they think we are connected, they will destroy us both." "Then let them try," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. "Omar," but he touched her arm lightly, stopping her words. "Zahira, you have lived your entire life losing things. Your father, your home, your mother, your name. I will not let you lose more because others fear your light." His hand slipped from her arm before propriety could break between them. Zahira's throat tightened. "You deserve to stand," he said, "not shrink." Zahira looked at him with an ache that felt too large for her chest. "I do not know how to stand anymore." "Then borrow my strength," he whispered. Her breath caught, but before she could answer, a steward appeared at the end of the corridor. "Your Highness," he said with a bow, "the council is assembling." Omar nodded and stepped back, but his eyes never left Zahira's. "Come," he said softly. "Walk with me." Zahira hesitated. "Everyone will see." "Yes," he said. "Let them." She inhaled a trembling breath, and she walked beside him. Servants stared. Nobles froze. Whispered speculation followed them down every hall. Some looked horrified, some intrigued, some triumphant. But Zahira walked with her chin lifted, because walking beside Omar felt like finding a place she had never known she wanted. When they reached the council chamber, Omar paused outside the large double doors. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "But stay," she nodded. He pushed the doors open. The room fell silent. Nobles sat along a long, curved table, arranged in tiers according to rank. Advisors stood near tall windows. Elvira stood near the center, perfectly poised, her expression smooth and self-satisfied. But even she froze when she saw Zahira enter beside Omar. A ripple of shock traveled through the chamber. "Your Highness," the head counselor said, rising from his seat. "What is the meaning of this?" Omar stepped forward. "I bring truth." Elvira let out a faint laugh. "You bring a servant. I bring a woman whose integrity has been called into question without cause," Omar replied. Elvira folded her hands. We shall see. The council motioned for Zahira to step forward. Zahira stood just behind Omar's shoulder, close enough to feel the strength he carried like armor, far enough to give him space to speak. The councillor addressed him. Your Highness, Lady Elvira has raised concerns of possible political ties, hidden knowledge, and suspicious behavior. Given the delicate nature of our negotiations, we must determine whether this servant poses any threat. Zahira's breath stilled. Omar lifted his chin. She poses no threat. Her knowledge comes not from politics, but from heritage. Elvira stepped forward. Heritage she concealed. Because you would twist it against her, Omar said. The room stirred. Elvira smiled thinly. If she is innocent, she should speak for herself. She turned to Zahira. Tell the council who her father was. Tell them what he carried. Tell them why she ran. Zahira felt her chest tighten. Omar turned halfway toward her. You do not owe them pain. Zahira swallowed. But I owe myself truth. She stepped forward slowly. The nobles leaned in. Her voice was soft, but clear. My father was a scholar, she said. He preserved stories, not secrets, histories, not weapons. We fled because others sought what did not exist. They blamed him for not possessing it. They punished him for honesty. A murmur filled the chamber. Elvira made a small, dismissive sound. Touching, but irrelevant. Is it? Zahira asked. When the very manuscripts my father protected speak of unity between our cultures, when they show we share more than we divide, the council leaned forward, intrigued. Omar stepped beside her again. And it is precisely that unity we seek today. Elvira frowned. This is sentimental. The girl hides knowledge. That alone is dangerous. The only danger here, Omar said calmly, is allowing fear to silence truth. He reached into his coat and withdrew the folded page Zahira had copied years ago. Slowly he held it up. The council whispered with interest. This, Omar said, is not a political document. It is a cultural one, a reminder of shared history, a symbol of peace, not conflict. He placed it gently on the table before the council. Zahira watched, her heart trembling. Elvira's lips parted in anger. You expose confidential records. They were never confidential, Omar said. They were lost, and now found. One councillor carefully unfolded the page, tracing the script with reverence. This is beautiful work, he murmured, preserved with great care. Another noble looked at Zahira. You wrote this? Zahira nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, Elvira pounced. There. Proof she holds skills no servant should. Proof she hides her past. Zahira lifted her head. I hid nothing for gain, only for survival. Elvira opened her mouth to argue, but the councillor lifted a hand. Lady Elvira, you have spoken much. Allow others to speak. Elvira fell silent, though fury smouldered in her eyes. The councillor addressed Zahira. Child, what you endured should not condemn you. Zahira blinked rapidly, the words striking her with unexpected gentleness. Another councillor stood. If anything, it honors us to have someone among us who preserved such heritage. Zahira's breath shuddered. Several nobles nodded in agreement. Elvira paled. Omar stepped forward. I ask that Zahira be restored to her duties, her name cleared and her dignity returned. The head councillor nodded slowly. So it shall be. A ripple of approval moved through the room. Elvira stiffened. You reward deception. No, the councillor said firmly. We punish injustice. Elvira stared at Zahira, hatred sharp and cold, but she bowed stiffly to the council and stepped back. Omar released a quiet breath. Zahira stood still, hardly believing she had not been condemned. Her hands trembled at her sides. The council dismissed them with warm praise and wishes for peace. One councillor even bowed slightly to Zahira as she passed. She barely felt her feet. Outside the chamber, the corridor stretched before them like a calm shoreline after a storm. Zahira took one step, then two, then stopped entirely, clutching the wall as her breath broke with a sound too fragile to contain. Omar was beside her in an instant. Zahira, he murmured, look at me. She turned with tears in her eyes. I truly thought, I know, he said, voice soft with understanding. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "How did this happen? How did I survive this?" "Because you stood in the truth," he said. "No," she whispered. "Because you stood with me." He reached out, slowly, carefully, until his fingers brushed her cheek. She did not pull away. Her breath hitched. "Zahira," he said quietly, "from the moment you answered me in the courtyard, I have been unable to stop thinking of you." Her eyes widened. "You carry strength wrapped in humility," he said, "dignity wrapped in silence, light wrapped in fear, and I—" His voice softened further. "I cannot look at you without feeling something shift inside me." She felt her heart open in a way that frightened her. "Omar," she whispered, "you must not—" "I must," he said. His hand cupped her cheek more fully now, and Zahira trembled, not from fear but from the overwhelming tenderness of it. "You asked me last night not to risk myself," he said. "But today I realize something else. Protecting you is not a risk. It is a calling." Her breath broke again. "Why me?" "Because destiny led me to you," he said. "Because every challenge we faced pulled me closer to you. Because I admire you. Because I respect you. Because I—" He stopped himself. She looked up at him, tears on her lashes. "Say it." He stepped closer, their foreheads nearly touching. "I care for you more deeply than I have ever cared for anyone." Zahira's voice trembled. "I am a servant." "You are the woman who changed me," he replied. She closed her eyes, letting the truth sink into her skin like warmth after a long winter. He took both her hands gently. "Zahira, I wish to build a life with you, one where you are not hidden, one where your past is honored, one where your knowledge becomes a bridge between our worlds." She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "You speak of what cannot be." "It can," he said, "if you choose it." She hesitated, her heart racing. "But your kingdom will welcome the woman I choose," he said firmly. She drew in a small breath. "And the palace will learn that love does not bend to rank." Her eyes widened. "Love," she echoed softly. He nodded, letting his thumb brush her hand in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Yes," he whispered. "Love." Zahira felt something inside her finally loosen, fear melting into relief, sorrow melting into hope, isolation melting into warmth. "Omar," she whispered, "I never thought I would belong anywhere again." "You belong with me," he said. And then, in the quiet of the corridor, where they had faced judgment, he drew her close. Zahira felt her heart rise to meet his. He did not kiss her, not yet, not here, but he held her as one holds something precious, and she rested against him with a peace she had not felt since childhood. When they stepped apart, he took her hand and pressed it gently to his chest. "If you will have me," he said, "my kingdom will be yours." Zahira felt tears fall freely now, but they were tears of release, not fear. "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose you freely." Omar's eyes softened with joy. He lifted her hand and held it between both of his, reverent and steady. "Then we begin our future today," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. He guided her back toward the courtyard where everything had changed, where he had once insulted her, where she had stunned him with truth, where shadows had listened, where fear had grown, and where courage had awakened. Now, beneath the drifting petals of early spring and the soft echo of distant music, their new life began with quiet certainty and the warmth of joined hands. And Zahira realized she was no longer alone, not in her story, not in her future, not in her heart. She looked up at him, smiling through tears, ready to walk toward the promise he had offered, ready for a life rebuilt, not on fear, but on love. Omar drew her close once more, his voice low and full of wonder, as he whispered the first words of their shared destiny. "Come with me, Zahira. Our future awaits." Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.